This is the Change Physician Podcast, episode 115.
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my fabulous co-host, Dr. Melissa Katie. Dr. Katie, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited about our little topic.
Our little topic, yeah. So this is part two of our other episode, which was really kind of on the fears of retirement, where we sort of just kind of brought to the surface some fears about not having enough. We can call about the lack of actual funds when it worried about the money running out. This particular episode, though, we're going to talk about retirement fears that aren't related to money. So there's like superficial and then there's deeper. And I think so many people are focused on the idea of wanting to retire because they're focusing on deferring their whole life until a later date, killing themselves now rather than trying to optimize their current living situation as best they can and praying for the future. But they get so focused on the money part, I think people, they forget about the other things. Mm-hmm. And the ones that came to mind, and I've thought about quite a bit, is two. One is health and retirement concerns with health. Mm-hmm. And the second one is meaning. Mm-hmm. And what do you find that's meaningful when you are no longer required or externally motivated to do something? Mm-hmm. The first one, when it comes to health, I find fascinating because long time ago, I remember there was a study that came out. I don't know, it was a study. It was a report that came out, ended up being by like an investment bank or Fidelity or somebody. Mm-hmm. But it said how the whole report was on healthcare costs and how healthcare costs are going up and and you need to save even more. Well, obviously they want you to put more money into their investment vehicles, right? So they say, you be worried about your health because you're going to be sick, and average adult male over the age of 50 is on 5 different prescription medications, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to have all this health and healthcare is going up and you need to have all this. Now you have to even save even more money. This is probably where that ridiculous idea of everybody needs $10 million to retire came from. Yeah. And my take on that was actually completely different because I'm like, okay, well, sure, let's save money. That makes sense. We're doing that for retirement. And yes, be cognizant of the fact that there is going to be healthcare. And that's probably one of my other big fears is the healthcare system specifically. We'll talk about that in a second. But for your health with retirement is why aren't we investing? The stuff you do to invest in your health today is as important as what you invest in your retirement funds for the future. Right. You can't, just like you don't want to defer retirement savings until you're 50, you don't want to defer your plans for health until you're 50 or 60 or God forbid retired and expect that somehow because you saved all this extra money, that's going to now cover your health in retirement, because living in retirement sickly, mm-hmm. to me, is a fear. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? Like when it comes to retirement and how you will now physically live? Because I do think people will briefly touch over it, but they focus so much on the money part, they neglect the part about investing in health.
Yeah. So that's where I'm always tooting my horn. So from the get-go, I only worked 2 to 4 days a week out of my training. Intuitively knew that I probably would have burned myself out really quickly when I think back on it. And I felt like, why would you push your body to an extreme, whether lack of sleep, doubling up on your work? Why would you essentially sacrifice your health for the long term to make the extra money that you apparently are going to need because you're supposed to be sickly later? Like, it made no sense to me. Like, there's a balance. I don't mind working hard when I work. I don't mind I have a very strong work ethic, one that I almost have to reel in order to make sure that I'm, looking out for myself and my overall health or wellness. And, unfortunately, the system will demand more of you than you really need to give at times. And I don't talk about the moments of, some crazy thing happens, you have to step up. But I mean, in general, like if your overall plan is to just give of yourself whenever they want you to, then I don't think that's really tailored to your overall wellness. Unfortunately, I feel very strongly that the medical system is not designed for human being wellness. So I think you have to be very intentional and aware that everything that you're doing from your 20s to your retirement age, that all of that lifestyle is going to either set you up in a good way or in a bad way. Now, there's unfortunate situations that could happen to anybody. But if you want to be intentional and aim for a healthy retirement, you have to generally be healthy during that work time. So, yeah, I feel very strongly that if, and can I add the other part too about what I realized in the medical field about other things that are important for retirement? You mind if I touch on that, or do you want to expand?
Oh, go ahead, because I'm not sure what you're, what.
So I didn't think about, you think, oh, retirement, and you stop doing this job that you feel like, I don't have to get up every morning and do this. I've actually asked my patients when they're like recent retirees, I'm like, oh, so how's retirement? Open-ended question. And I'll get some people that'll be like, oh, it's great, da da da, do this and this. And what normally happens when they're happy is they have some hobbies or things they do, or they travel. Unfortunately, the other people that say, it's all right, they don't talk about anything that they enjoy. They don't have any, and there's no structure. They don't have the friendships or relationships, or maybe they don't have any kids or family or anyone that they're close to. And they don't have these hobbies that they enjoy. So I learned really quickly within the first few years of, being in private practice, that one of the most important things you need to do for yourself is have other hobbies or things you like to do, or discover them or explore them, or intentionally try to nurture relationships, which can be very easy for someone like myself who can get caught up in work or doing things. And so I have to make an intention to meet with friends. But that is one of the things that over your lifetime, you have to create that other thing other than work. And whether it's relationships, hobbies, travel, whatever it might be.
So what you're basically saying is, because of talking to your patients, mm-hmm. it generated and recognized that there was a fear of, oh my God,
I don't want to be them.
Yeah, I don't want to retire and feel empty.
Yes. They're not volunteering or doing anything that seems of meaning, and not connecting and not finding joy in other things outside of work.
Well, and then people do neglect that as well, as they're like, you get so fixated and tunnel vision on this idea of retirement, and then you retire and stop. Well, how much of your identity is tied to what you were doing before? And the absence of that identity creates a crisis. Mm-hmm. That's pretty well documented. The other thing that I thought was kind of startling is what happens when people retire. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes they will die. Mm-hmm. and you're like, well, they're old and they're sick. Well, okay, well, why are they old and they're sick? And second of all, well, what else is occurring? Because there is a retirement, and maybe a lot of people don't think about it in this way. It's a major change from what your baseline is. Therefore, by definition, it's a stress. Mm-hmm. Now, that can either be a distressor or it can be a eustressor, but it is going to, no matter how likely it is, a stressful situation, and it's going to have stress-related effects on you. But I think that's an important point, though, is this idea of meaning. Mm-hmm. So we plan for retirement by retirement contributions or working, or however those plans when it comes to the wealth aspect. Mm-hmm. And then from the health aspect, maybe some of us kind of recognize that, okay, if I'm eating every day, eating right, exercising every day, moving my body, staying intellectually engaged in things, then I'm now investing in the health aspect. But the last part, I think, that transition into what is meaningful now, when we no longer have this requirement, right? Because our definition of requirement is you no longer required, you don't have to extrinsically be motivated to do something, because now you have the streams of income to support your day-to-day lifestyle. that transition is scary, and it's certainly scary to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't know. What are, so you're saying you're developing outside interest in meeting other people, but what other things have you thought about to kind of develop that intrinsic sense of meaning or identifying meaning in your existence, I guess?
Oh, I think I'm still in that process. I think it's funny. When you feel able, as we use a lot of times in our podcast, and you feel a sense of competence that whatever you put your mind to, you could do. There's a lot of things in life that I feel like I could do or I could be good at, but you can't do all of them in a way that you could be, excellent at every single one. I mean, you can dabble in things, and I do that a lot because I have a lot of curiosity and interest. Um, but figuring out which thing brings you the most meaning, like that's, I mean, especially I think for a lot of parents, there's a lot of meaning in raising their children and having creating a family. I don't have that as my source of meaning. But at the same time, your children would grow up and might move into another country, and you might have empty nest syndrome, where that's the question, where's your meaning beyond, just that person that you took care of for 18 years plus. But intrinsically, I feel like there's, even in my 40s, I'm still trying to figure, we all have things that we can work on. I'm not an exception. But I think that for right now, what I do part-time doing anesthesia, I try to create an amazing experience and take pride in that. And there could be different ways that business can grow or develop. But I have a lot of interest in a lot of the topics we talk about in the podcast. I think meaning wise, I think sometimes it's when life presents an opportunity that you take advantage of it, or if you have the resources, that you have the capacity to, not necessarily just financially, but giving of your time. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I
Well,
think
I'm going to say, ask you though, specifically, if someone was out there like thinking about transitioning to, or is in that process, what are action steps that you would do now or recommend to someone to actively start engaging in now in order to invest in that mental side, into that meaningful aspect?
Yeah. Well, you got to free up your time if all you're doing is working. And if that's not your end all be all passion and love, and if you're just trading time for money, I think you have to free up some time or carve out some time, whether it's weekends or, if you want to take a day off a week, I don't know, whatever it might be. It could be a few hours every week, but leaning into something that seems interesting, and maybe engaging in a community of something that you find interesting or enjoy. It might be kind of hard, people getting back out and engaging with people out of this pandemic, but I know everyone's different socially on how comfortable they are. But I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying if you're not doing anything but work, and if you suddenly had no work, that makes you uneasy, then you got to create structure in your life doing something else. Because the moment you don't have that work to create the structure for you, then you're going to, this loss of identity and potentially loss of feeling, I don't know, there's a dissonance, a discomfort that can happen when you're like, what do I do? There's got to be something you enjoy. Heck, it could be just walks in nature. I don't know.
Well, I think that's the point, though. There's a difference between, let's say advice giving, right? Oh, well, you need to find to do something, and then people say, well, what? Yeah. And you're like, I don't know, and we wouldn't know. So then the next step was, well, how? So they go, well, how do you? What's the process involved in identifying meaningful things in your life?
Yeah. Well, how does your kid find something he likes? Mom and dad made him try something.
Well, and that's a good point. So then we can like, well, how do people find these things? And I like that perspective of going back. Well, how do children, who in general, and if you're allowing them to do like self-directed stuff, they will explore their own interests. I do think as we get older, that gets more rigid and more difficult to do. We've kind of, I don't want to say lost that ability, but it's atrophied because of lack of use and kind of how the world structures some of those things. But I really like that. It's almost like retirement in some way can be shaped, or early retirement or preparatory for retirement. You can almost view it as second childhood, where pretend you are a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old and just explore. In fact, what we could say is, I even say, like, don't even, just do what, just, did you ever see that show, the Yes Show, or Yes Man or something? It was Jim Carrey.
Oh, I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
And it was like, just say yes to everything. So I think that would be okay, listeners, if you're out there, I want you to try the yes strategy. For 1 week, I just want you to say yes to everything and tell me how it works. Because we can devise that as the change physician preparatory retirement strategy of just say yes, right?
Because that's your loves.
Well, because kids that young, I mean, they'll say no to things, but more is because whatever, parental relationships. But typically, man, they're just like running around trying everything. And then the younger you get, is including things like putting bugs in your mouth. But there's that exploratory aspect to it, and if we can sort of pull that back in and redevelop that childlike side of us. So just, what would a small child do in this situation?
Yeah.
Let's not use preconceived notions and just say yes to try these new experiences.
Right. And there's a point where as children, you start worrying about what other people think. And then, so if you can kind of, right before that happens.
Yeah. Well, that's right. So the advantages that we have as we get older is, hopefully, we tend to not care as much about what other people think.
Right.
Hopefully, if you're on the path to retirement, you're getting to a place where you're feeling confident in your own, what a health wealth strategy or whatever. And so ultimately it comes down to just being able to restore that childhood curiosity and engage that. So I do think that's a little bit, I mean, so we go from, we got to find something interesting, right? So that's directed advice that's not super useful because it doesn't provide any structure on how to proceed with that course of action, to start engaging with your world as a 5-year-old would. So be curious and just start engaging your curiosities as a path to finding meaningful work. I think that provides a little bit more structure. And then the final structure then would be to create almost a program around that. What I mean by a program is a set of structured exercises that are designed, and this almost sounds counterintuitive, but they're designed to help you to explore that innate curiosity that a child has. So that would be on a challenge-based format, or you could say this week, say yes to everything, as I said earlier, or maybe for this month, I'm going to try this new skill. But doing these things before you retire, I think, as you had mentioned, at least what that does is it sets yourself up to have all these other interests, curiosities that you can explore and engage your time, rather than thinking you're going to develop those skills and strengths when you retire. Like, I think that's the worst way to do it. Like,
right. It's called prevention of retirement unhappiness.
Well, it's almost like saying, I want to run a marathon, so I'm going to wait until all this is done, until the marathon starts, and then I'm going to run the marathon.
Right.
You're probably not going to do too good.
No. And, even if you don't have fear about money, like, you could have the most money in the world and maybe like philanthropy and giving to good causes and creating those connections with different types of organizations, and feeling like you're doing good in the world, leaving a legacy. Like, to me, those are other forms of meaning, and no one can tell you what feels good or right or gives you a sense of meaning. It's really up to you to determine what that is for you. And it's a feel good feeling. It gives back to you without anyone having to tell you. It's something you have to explore for yourself. So yes, I think that is feeling empty in retirement and I don't mean like an empty like nest egg of savings, but like if you feel empty inside, the intangibles here, it's hard to enjoy the money you retire with if you don't develop yourself from within. That's, I think, the basis of what we're talking about.
Well, I think that when it comes to retirement, there's these universal themes that, so really we're talking about is simply living strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So we may mention this is future-oriented living strategies when you're planning for retirement, but all this comes down to living, which is what we're really focusing on in the podcast here. You got to recognize what are the key elements to living a meaningful life. Well, you do have to have some degree of wealth. You know, have to have the income streams where at least you're feeling comfortable and safe and certain. You do have to have meaningful health, meaning where your belief in yourself, we haven't talked about actually personal health beliefs and how they affect your actually overall physical health, but you believe that you're healthy, that you feel strong, that you feel vibrant, that you feel like you're capable of doing things. That's a living strategy. Relationships is the other one, because we didn't touch on that as much.
Mm-hmm.
But whether it's now or then, making sure you have meaningful relationships and connecting either with your spouse, your kids, your loved ones, your friends, your, who else. And then ultimately the self part, which is the meaningful self. Do I have meaning now? Do I still feel like I have meaning in the future? So I guess that's a long way to say is we're talking about fears of retirement, but really the same strategies that we need to be focusing on now and practicing are the same life strategies that are going to be as important or more important in the future. So I guess got to start now, folks. Like just
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
do it now.
That's the thing. You said, meaningful wealth, meaningful health, and the third is meaningful self, and that is in concert with with relationships with other people and within yourself. So I feel like that kind of encompasses overall wellness. and it reminds me, it sounds like a totally different topic, but when we talk to people even about pain and management of that, like it's all the strategies you use for your overall wellness that optimize your situation.
Yeah
Full circle.
Yeah, and so we kind of went off topic with fears and started addressing the fears with we were what are the non-money retirement fears, and I do think that's is a meaning. There is a lack of meaning that sometimes occurs with retirement, and so what are the skills steps that we can take now to engage in that childhood curiosity? Really engage in that childhood curiosity is something that we should propagate and practice now, no matter where you are in your life journey. And then really pursuing the same strategies that we should be, in preparation of retirement and during retirement is the same strategies that we should be doing now.
Yeah.
And when
And
it comes to meaningful life, work, all that stuff.
Yeah. And you think about what is it about us as adults, we get to this place where our concerns, our anxieties and fears kind of change the way we view things or ignore the things we shouldn't. I think somehow it dampers that part of us, that child part of us, because of those anxieties and fears. And sometimes we squelch those other things that are important for the sake of thinking we're preparing or protecting ourselves from whatever anxiety or fears we have. So I don't know if that made sense, but I feel like there's the very things that are important still, sometimes we let them go because of the nature of the here and now and the worries about the future.
I would agree. Agree.
Yeah. Any other last comments before I take us out?
No, I think now I'm just sitting here thinking about like, if it was in that book, everything I learned in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I don't think I read that book. Maybe I need to read it now.
Yeah, another book to add to our list.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you listening, I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my awesome, amazing, fabulous Oregonian co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. Did you not like those adjectives?
No, it goes back to the whole idea of I have a hard time accepting sort of
Well,
praise.
I'm
I
just
know.
gonna praise you anyway.
And then I was also a little disappointed because I'm like, man, you had a lot more adjectives than you use, and I didn't get that many in on you. So now there's a
I don't even remember what
reciprocal
I said. I just
relationship.
said them so fast. Well, for those of you listening, if you haven't joined the community, please go to thechangephysician.com. Whether you're a physician or a physician ally, we'd love to see you there. If you have not checked out our podcast and all the venues, it's everywhere, iTunes, Spotify, et cetera. We'd love any rating or reviews. Feel free to send us a comment, or if you want to email Dr. Kevin at thechangephysician.com, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, please take care.
Stay well, folks.